Okay, so I will open the room for everybody now, yeah?
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm glad that you're joining today from wherever you may be on this rainy afternoon. Today we are getting together to learn more about ways to green the logistics sector. And this event is part of a series during which we zoom in on different topics that we have covered in the framework of the European Mobility Atlas that the Heinrich-Böll Foundation has published earlier this year. My name is Lisa Tostado, and I am honored to moderate today's debate. And I'm the head of the International Climate, Trade and Agriculture Policy Program at the Heinrich-Böll Foundation in Brussels. And for those of you who don't know our foundation, we are a political foundation that is affiliated with the German Green Party that is represented in Germany's federal parliament. Before we dive into the content, just a few housekeeping rules. After a year and a half of different webinars, we decided to make this a more interactive session with a smaller number of people and a more, a format that also allows you to ask your questions. So after a series of inputs, you will also have the possibility to unmute yourselves and ask your questions orally if you wish to do so. But we also have the chat, in which you can always ask your questions throughout the entire debate, and I will make sure to forward at least some of them and obviously as many of them as possible to our speakers during the panel discussion towards the end of this event. And to speak up, you can raise your hand. You can find the raise hand button on the reactions icon. I think it's on the bottom right for you. That way I can see that you would like to speak up. And please be aware of the fact that this event is being live streamed and recorded. So let's start. As you all know, a number of challenges impede the scaling up of green logistics and more sustainable forms of freight transport in Europe, but also globally. Road transport continues to have the largest share of EU freight transport among the three inland transport modes. And global supply chains for the transport of goods rely heavily on the shipping sector. And maritime shipping is the most efficient, low cost, but also the dirtiest transportation method. And zero carbon shipping is still in its infancy. An increase of rail freight transport, on the other hand, would clearly help to decarbonize the transport sector and combat climate change, but high costs and infrastructure challenges remain barriers for more decisive steps. And if you would like to read more about that, we have an article by Werner Balsen, who covers the challenges and opportunities of rail to transport goods as one of the articles in our European Mobility Atlas, which you can either read online, download as a PDF, or also order physical copies of. And the COVID-19 pandemic has also exacerbated already existing tendency of more and more online services for transporting goods. And it has also hugely affected the way urban logistics are organized. Sustainable modes of freight transport in cities, for instance, with more cargo bikes, exist, but they are so far underrepresented. And in addition to all these sustainability changes on an environmental front, there's also a whole number of social challenges, such as fair conditions for delivery staff or human rights abuses in the freight and logistics sector. And the European Mobility Atlas also addresses them. I invite you once again to browse the table of contents and look at the chapters that interest you the most. And today's event aims at understanding the existing barriers. So why is the logistics sector so hard to decarbonize, and why has so little progress been made so far? And second, to also highlight some best practices and options to make the transport of goods more sustainable. We will first hear from Kieran Cuff. He is a member of the European Parliament, the Greens EFA group, and he is also the coordinator of the group in the Committee on Transport and Tourism. And he will first provide us with some political context and some insights from the European Parliament. And then we will move on with a discussion of two concrete examples of ways forward, one in the urban logistics sector with a UK-based company represented by Harriet Hurd. And then we will hear from a representative from a research center on zero carbon shipping in Denmark, Jan-Christoph Napierski. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. And without further ado, I will now pass the floor to Kieran Cuff to provide us with the political background. He has been involved in politics since the 80s already. He has served as a Minister of State in Ireland, and he has been a member of the European Parliament since 2019. And in addition to that, he's also member of, or president even, of a European cross-party network of members of different parliaments, so the European one, but also regional and national ones, with the core objective being the promotion of renewable energy and energy efficiency. So please, the floor is yours. Share some insights on your work on decarbonizing the transport sector in Europe.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. It's always a little bit scary to be reminded of how long one has been involved in political campaigning. But I think, you know, on the bright side of things, even though the overall environmental situation around the world sometimes makes us despair, there are some good things happening. As you pointed out in your introduction, maritime is the dirtiest, but you know, road freight can certainly give maritime a run for its money. And anything we can do to shift goods off either road-based transport by conventional means or the current shipping methods can only be good. And rail in particular is extraordinarily clean, certainly in terms of greenhouse gas emissions compared to both maritime and sea shipping. So look, thank you for the opportunity to address you. And as you point out in the description of the event, there are many challenges when it comes to greening the transport of goods in the EU. They range from environmental to social to financial and infrastructure challenges. And unfortunately, within the European Union at the moment, road transport's share of the modal split remains stubbornly high, and attempts to change this unsustainable approach, they face a strong backlash. And some in the European Parliament they seem happier moving people and freight into the air than they are to moving off roads. And this shows to the scale of the political challenge. I think particularly as you move to the right of centre, there are some who take a conviction that any interference with the type of mode that's used is restricting people's choices and is unfair. So I think we do have to have a dialogue, or certainly a discussion, about how we prioritize different modes and how we persuade some of our political colleagues here in the European Parliament that modal shift can be positive for the environment. Last December, the European Commission published its strategy on smart and sustainable mobility. But unfortunately, while there are some positive elements and some good ideas, on the whole, it is insufficiently ambitious, and that remains a problem. Currently within the European Parliament, we are negotiating our position on this strategy, and I'm the shadow on this, and we're making slow progress. Certain social and environmental issues, such as modal shift, which technologies, the pros and cons of platform work, all of these are quite polarizing within the Parliament. And now when it comes to what is currently on the table, we have two proposals that are of particular relevance to the discussion of greening freight and logistics. And they fall into this Fit for 55 package, which is all about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by close to 55% between 1990 and 2030. There's about 16 pieces of legislation in total in the Fit for 55 package, and 3 of them deal with transport, the refuel aviation, but then more importantly, the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation and the Fuel EU Maritime. So the first one there on alternative fuels is about surface-based transport, and the Fuel EU refers to maritime. On the first one, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, or AFIR as we call it within the EU bubble, there are some positive proposals on electrification and the rollout of publicly accessible recharging stations for both light and heavy duty vehicles. But there are some shortcomings when it comes to the targets for HGVs, where the binding target on member states will not match the uptake of vehicles in the market. And the target is not a fleet-based target, while for light vehicles it is. This is unfortunate, and we hope this will be rectified in the negotiations. And the proposal will bind EU member states to rolling out this infrastructure across both the core and comprehensive trans-European network, the TEN-T network. Here again, there are some shortcomings in terms of targets, both time and location, but the direction of travel is pretty positive. The proposal also foresees the rollout of hydrogen for road transport. As Greens, we're skeptical of hydrogen for road transport, except in a few exceptional circumstances. Why? Well, we like to look at the well to wheel ratio in all of this. And we feel that hydrogen is best used in the hard to abate sectors like shipping. And I think we should focus on the most cost effective and least polluting options for roads. And they are modal shift and electrification. Hydrogen also needs to be renewable. You've heard a lot about the different colors of hydrogen. If it ain't green, we really don't want to engage too much. So green hydrogen is renewables based. Blue is carbon capture and storage. Still really not moving in the right direction to the extent that we want it to. And then of course there is all types of other colors where there are concerns from an environmental perspective. The hydrogen needs to be renewables based, or else we are simply throwing a lifeline to the gas industry. And let's not forget the power of the oil and gas lobbying that goes on in Brussels. And we fear that they really want to put their foot in the door by saying, ooh, hydrogen can do everything in transportation. And that simply stretches out the end of fossil gas and oil for another 30 years. And that's a real worry. But look, there is the opportunity to get this proposal right. And if we do it right, we will slowly but surely ramp up the infrastructure required for decarbonising road transport, and therefore both freight and urban logistics. The second infrastructure, Fuel EU Maritime, or the second proposal, the second piece of legislation, Fuel EU Maritime, is quite complex. And unfortunately, it includes some problematic elements. In addition to some shortcomings on oversight and enforcement, the major flaw is that it promotes unsustainable fuels. And we, of course, recognize how difficult it is to green the shipping sector. But when we know that most LNG-powered ships emit more greenhouse gas than heavy fuel oil ships, when you factor in methane slippage, the proposal is counterproductive. And if you consider that the average lifetime of a ship is around 30 years, such measures only serve to promote carbon lock-in. I think we need many other measures to be promoted. That includes slow steaming, it includes electrification, wind power, green hydrogen, and renewable hydrogen-based ammonia. These offer the most sustainable path for decarbonising shipping. And we're seeing some interesting developments as well, with the use of air being released to allow ships to move more slowly through water, or to move more efficiently through water. But more generally, we need to make better use of short sea shipping. I haven't yet encountered anyone who manages to say that without slipping over the three words. But short sea shipping, inland waterways, and rail to alleviate road freight traffic. So we need a multimodal approach to transport flows that reduce road transport through mainland Europe, and particularly in sensitive areas like the Alps. Europe's geography gives seaports a competitive advantage, given that there are many of them, and also there's relatively short distances between them. And this can favor the short sea shipping model. And such approaches need to be married with better spatial planning, such as locating industry near ports and improving intermodal connections with rail towards hinterland terminals, including direct and tax-free rail connections to industrial plants. And a related and important instrument is the Directive on Combined Transport. And that's the only EU legal instrument that can directively incentivize the shift from road freight to lower emission modes. Unfortunately, it dates from 1992, and attempts to reform this directive have not been successful thus far. So it hasn't been particularly effective, and actually it was weaponized during the last attempt at a revision to introduce loopholes on social protection provisions. So we now hope that the new Commission proposal in this mandate will come forward, and some of the points that we would like to see in it are as follows. We'd like to see a framing of the proposal in terms of overall societal gains, including economic, social, and social responsibility, ecological and social sustainability. We'd like to see obligations on member states to reduce the impact of freight on the environment and public health, clearly. And we'd like to see transshipment points, not merely combined transport terminals, but with a low-tech facility to change modes as well, and improving cross-border connections. We tend to focus on the big infrastructure projects, the Rail Baltica, but there's a lot of missing links and possibilities for improving cross-border connections around mainland, around Europe. We'd like to see a focus on the last mile logistics, the cargo bikes, the freight trams, combined passenger and freight vehicles. We'd like to see these as eligible for combined transport support. And then finally, on urban logistics, we expect the Commission to come forward with an urban mobility package, probably later this month. And we hope that both carrots and sticks will be used to improve mobility in the urban context. And many of the issues I mentioned above will also impact on urban logistics. So, in conclusion, there are many challenges, but between the Fuel EU Maritime and the alternative fuel infrastructure proposal, the TEN-T and combined transport revisions, and action at national and local level, we may be able to shape a more sustainable freight and urban logistics future. But it is not going to be easy, and there will certainly be challenges ahead as we move over the next few years within Europe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kieran. That was a wonderful job in kind of describing the overall political context in which we are in, and like setting the scene for our debate now. And just as a heads up for the audience, if you have any questions directly to Kieran, please make sure that you use the chat function as of now, because unfortunately he has to leave us a little bit early at 2:30. So I will also kickstart the debate with him. So be active in the chat, don't hesitate. So thank you for pointing out some good solutions and the risks of some false solutions. You spoke about the multimodality and that it needs to be married with spatial planning as well, that there are some missing links, and that is actually a great bridge now to the last mile logistics, urban mobility, and how to actually fill the gap and to connect these missing links. I now pass the floor to Harriet Hurd. She is from Steadify, a company based in the UK, as I mentioned earlier on. She's the head of marketing there, and will now let us know more about this company, how it was set up, what it does on a daily basis, and how it can contribute to a more sustainable future of urban mobility. Please, Harriet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lisa, and really, really interesting to hear everything you had to say, Kieran. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about our model for sustainable urban logistics in the UK, and it's about our mission to create better cities by transforming the way that goods move around. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you very much. Really, just to set the scene, we are everything that stems from the challenges really in the urban setting when it comes to logistics are around us having an outdated system in place, and that's regional distribution centres that are placed out of the city and fleets of diesel vans that are heading in every day. And when you look at that in the context of the rapidly growing levels of e-commerce that we're seeing, you've got a real problem with congestion and pollution. I think in the UK, there's about 5 billion packages being moved every year, and our cities just cannot sustain that. They're at breaking point. The World Economic Forum, I think, is predicting that there's going to be a 36% rise in delivery vehicles by the year 2030. We're seeing costs to the UK economy from congestion, about £7.9 billion. And, everyone has seen the really scary figures around health implications. It's around 40,000 early deaths that are attributed to poor air quality each year in the UK. So, we understand the impact that urban freight is having on all of those aspects. And if we want to build healthy, thriving and livable cities, we've simply got to get a handle on urban freight. Next slide, please. So I just want to share with you a couple of conventional urban logistics models, just so we know sort of what we're comparing Zedify to. So first of all, here you've got a same day point-to-point service. So really, all of the deliveries marked on the map there, it looks like a bit like a plate of spaghetti, all of these different strands, which aren't consolidated in any way. Often driven by time-sensitive requirements, kind of urgent deliveries. You've got half-empty vehicles crisscrossing all over town, and obviously with that, lots of implications for the city. Next slide, please. Then with this, you have a next day, last mile logistics model, and you can see all of those different points of entry into the city. That's a diesel van coming from an out-of-town fulfillment centre, whether that's a parcel carrier or perhaps a retailer. And they're doing a long stem delivery journey there, which is quite linear. There are restrictions in terms of the service quality that they're able to offer to their end users, so being able to choose time slots, etc. But there are lots of multiple issues in terms of the impact for the city around air quality, congestion, and also around employment as well, because typically that's a driver that's employed from nearby the distribution hub rather than the city in which the deliveries are taking place. Next slide, please. So the Zedify model really is based around three different aspects. The first is our micro hubs. So we place a consolidation hub right at the edge of a city that acts as a gateway for inbound local deliveries, and then also outbound as well, to or from the areas that we serve. And by having a hub that's really local to those areas that deliveries and collections are taking place, it enables companies to be able to offer much more flexibility to the end user. So you can offer multiple chosen time slots throughout the day, because you're often visiting that area, 2 or 3 times each day. And you're also able to consolidate all of that work that we saw in the first 2 models there. So much less spaghetti. Zedify are known in the UK for our fleets of cargo bikes. So it's around 95% of our fleets that are cargo bikes, trikes or quads, and they're far more suited to the urban landscape. You know, you can park right outside your delivery point. Recent research has shown that they're around 60% faster than vans in cities, and all of those ambitions around creating a livable city with, you know, zero tailpipe emissions, better air quality, streets that encourage active travel, you know, from other road users, pedestrians and cyclists, are all made possible by remoding to cargo bikes. And then the third aspect of the kind of model that we've got set up is a tech system that supports us to be able to offer a really efficient and consolidated service that's built around our approach of micro hubs and cargo bikes, not using a kind of off-the-shelf system that's built really, you know, for that outdated model. And because we're a franchise model, that's really important that we're helping to convert as many deliveries as possible and remodeling them to cargo bikes by supporting our franchisees in the cities that they operate. So next slide, please. Here you can just see one of our Zedify four-wheeled EAV cargo quads, making use of cycle infrastructure in Brighton, just to give you a little piece of what it looks like. Next slide, please. And then looking at the different kinds of services that we offer. So we split this out into only mile, which is doing deliveries within the bounds of the city. And that might be, you know, from a business to their customers that are based within the city. Or it might be doing, you know, deliveries from a business to another business, from offices, etc. And then last mile deliveries, which are obviously acting as that gateway for parcel carriers and retailers bringing goods into the city. And then first mile collections, and this might be reverse logistics, perhaps for a waste company, returns for a retailer, or even perhaps businesses that are based within a city and use us to do their local deliveries to their customers within the city, but want a one-stop shop and want to, you know, prevent emissions from the first mile of goods that they're shipping out to the rest of the UK. And that can come back to our micro hub for onwards shipping. Next slide, please. So what does that look like in a city? Well, the Zedify model really has, it works best within a 3-mile radius of each hub that we have. And in a small city, you only need one hub to be able to service the whole city and consolidate all of that same day, last mile work that we saw kind of earlier on in the presentation. But when it gets to a larger city, you really need multiple hubs to be able to service all of them. So in London, we are building out a multi-hub mesh network model with hubs that are connected by EV trunking to carry on protecting that very kind of inner city and being able to always remode to a cargo bike, which is the best mode for doing deliveries within the city centre. Next slide, please. Here you can just see inside one of our micro hubs. This is in Zedify Cambridge. So you can just see all of the trikes and quads that are lined up there, the goods that are coming in, that are all set out and laid out and ready to go get put on board for delivery, and, you know, consolidated for all of those different kinds of deliveries. So ones that are coming from out of the city, ones that are coming from within it, and combining those, you just get a much more efficient delivery service. Next slide, please. Here you just have a little bit of an overview of the kinds of vehicles that we have in our fleet. So as I mentioned, 95% of our fleet is made up of cargo bikes, the 2-wheeled ones at the start, trikes and quads. We do have some electric vans that we use to support slightly further afield work. We're working with a customer that has kind of a mix of different collection and delivery points. Or perhaps somebody that has a mixture of freight profiles, so slightly larger packages. But really the trikes and quads are the backbone of the fleet because they have that perfect balance between speed, efficiency, but also being able to have a slightly larger payload to enable us to consolidate to a greater extent. Next slide, please. So here you can just see a range of the kind of businesses that we work with. So we work with some big name 3PLs, parcel carriers, doing their last mile deliveries within cities. We work with retailers like Blackwell's Books, where we offer a ship from store service, or Freddy's Flowers, who do weekly flower subscriptions in cities and across the UK. And we work with the local authorities, and that can sometimes be providing a specific service for businesses within their area, launching a cargo bike service, as we do in Waltham Forest and Bristol. And then also waste companies. So Valpak, we work with doing battery collections from city centre retail collection points. So, people can take batteries into a local store. We collect them on our cargo bikes, take them back to our hub, bulk them up, and then a larger vehicle can come and collect them from our edge of city hub. Next slide, please. So here you have just a bit of a summary overview of our network across the UK. So we've got 10 depots in 9 UK cities. It's the largest fleet of light electric vehicles in the UK. And then we have plans to be in 50 cities in the next 3 years. Next slide, please. So we have taken a look at our impact against the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's perhaps just worth highlighting here that when we've calculated our emissions impact, we have 90% lower emissions per kilometre than an electric van by using cargo bikes and trikes. And also, that's obviously about eliminating local harmful air pollution. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I guess is quite unique in the logistics sector is that ZFI is a living wage employer and have been since our inception. It was something that was really important to the founders when they set the service up. So it's been a key pillar really of the service offering. And it's not only important, for their ethics, for obviously our kind of messaging and marketing, but it's also proven to be a really, really strong business decision, because we have really low turnover levels. We have really strong teams, and we have an excellent net promoter score. So how prepared our customers would be to recommend us to somebody else. It's 86, and the kind of industry standard is anything from 0 to 40. So the service quality that you're able to offer is really important. So there's a big business incentive, I think, for other logistics firms to start to take this approach to the way that they employ their riders and delivery staff. And we're at the beginning of our journey really in terms of representation, but we're just going through B Corp, and so looking at ways that we can attract and retain less well-represented groups across the whole network. Next slide, please.
Harriet, sorry, you have to come to an end. I'm happy to come back to any of those questions. So sure. one more minute and just focus on the last points, and then we can come back to the questions that you didn't have enough time to cover.
Sure, no problem at all. So just the last slide here is all about the barriers. So really what we want to see is local authorities take a more strategic approach to the way that they're planning for freight in cities. And we want to see that ambition on a par with park and rides that happen to prevent people from using their own personal cars to enter city centres. It's all about allocating space for micro hubs, and the gains that they can expect to see are not just about efficiencies on freight, but about creating those livable cities that we all deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for having had to cut you off here, but we will definitely come back to the barriers that you're facing and the policy changes that would make it easier for companies like yours to succeed. Looking at the time, we will now come to our third speaker, because now we looked at a very concrete example in urban logistics with a specific company. And now we will turn to a research center that performs research on zero carbon shipping. So another big fish to fry, no pun intended, when it comes to decarbonizing the logistics sector. It is now to Jan-Christoph Napierski. He is the head of regulatory affairs at Maersk McKinney Møller Center for Zero and Carbon Shipping. And as a fun fact, he was also the first German to have worked as a public servant in the Danish Foreign Ministry. So after having spent the first 30 minutes of this event in Ireland and the UK, we will now come back to the continental part of Europe and hear from a Danish experience and the research center. Please, Jan Christoph, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And thank you very much also for the very kind introduction. I hope you can see my presentation and you can hear me well. First and foremost, also thanks to Kieran for his very good introduction, and to Harriet. And now coming from the land side and the air to the sea side, I'm talking to you from Copenhagen, actually the city center right next to the port. And what we see here is a number of different ships, including smaller ships, harbor taxis going on electricity, to the very, very big liners going all the way to the US and China and other places in the world. I'm a member of and working for the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping in Copenhagen. And to begin with, I should make it clear that the center is not part of Maersk, the shipping company that you might know, but actually an independent research and innovation platform, which received 50 million euro from the foundation behind the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller company, and therefore we are non-commercial and independent. Well, the point of departure is not easy, as Karen also pointed out in the beginning. It doesn't look too good. We got 100,000 vessels globally consuming 300 million tons of fossil fuel every year. And therefore, the sector accounts for around 3% of global CO2 emissions. Actually, some might claim it's 10% of the transport sector. So it's really big emissions, and it's also difficult emissions in many ways. Difficult, not at least because looking at the Paris Agreement that you all know, there was no inclusion of shipping or the air transport sector in the Paris Agreement. So we actually negotiate and look at how we can reach our climate targets, not within the COP, but actually at IMO, the International Maritime Organization. But let's look at how emissions look like in the future. Well, you see 4 lines here. To begin with, it's one black one. That's the path we're on. That's what happened until now. And then you have a line on top, which means that if nothing happens, then actually emissions won't stay where we are, but actually they would go up. If we continue with some energy saving, some measures here, some measures there, but basically the business we do today, then you see the second line, the gray line, which is the path we're on, which means although shipping sector will grow in the next years to come, we will actually stay somewhere where we are now, but nowhere where we should be in order to reach the Paris Agreement. And even if we just should keep below 2 degrees, you can see that's slightly unambitious still. Our goal for the center matches the goal of many other stakeholders out there. Is actually a decarbonization of global shipping by 2050. And as you can see, it's quite a task to get there. So, and how do we work with it? Well, we are now 40 colleagues here in Copenhagen, and half of my colleagues are engineers. So we work actually very concretely along the whole value chain with industry partners on concrete solutions, from the production of the electron, for instance, a wind turbine with Siemens, to shipbuilding of energy efficient ships together with Mitsubishi and Japan, to the development of new ammonia engines with MAN here in Copenhagen, and clearly also some ship owners to look at how they could be pushed in the right direction. What is actually today is a very big day, because next to me in the other room there is the launch of our industry transition strategy with 70 participants here in Copenhagen and 700 online as well. It's on what does it take? How can we actually get to a decarbonized shipping sector? And for us, basically speaking, it's 4 central factors. Energy efficiency is the alpha and omega in all sectors, but also in the shipping sector. And with energy efficiency measures, you can get quite far, but you won't reach zero. So We focus on this, so this is one of the most important pillars in our center, to look at how can ships be built more energy efficient, and also operations be more energy efficient. But as mentioned, they won't get you to zero. So we need to look at fuels, as also Karen mentioned before. That could be, for instance, hydrogen-based fuels. We look very much for long-distance shipping on derivatives like green ammonia, for instance. So fuels play a major role here, and it's all the questions concerning the supply chain, from the innovation of green fuels, regulation, but also development and collaboration between all the parts who need to work with it. For instance, in a port where you could have the production of green fuels, but where you also have the bunkering of green fuels, where you need to look at how can we actually get them on the ship and how can we handle things in a safe way on the ship. Safety, absolutely important part of things here as well. Third element to it is the global regulation to unlock the transition, and I will get back to this in a second. And the fourth pillar is the first movers. It's absolutely important that we understand and enable those who are willing to establish pilot projects, large scale, to be able to do so. This is easier on lower levels if it's, for instance, short distance shipping or medium distance shipping. But if you look at long distance shipping, going from, for instance, from the port of Rotterdam to Los Angeles or to Shanghai, it's much more difficult. What we need is to build pilot projects between ports, ship owners, and the whole value chain in between, in order to go from fossil-based approach to a fossil-free approach. And this is also something that we help with together with our industry partners here in the center, and where we look at, okay, how can we actually establish such a, sometimes called green corridor globally, and move from there upwards to higher scale regional shipping, to intercontinental shipping, but also geographically from a smaller region to something that could in principle cover the whole globe. Shipping is a so-called hard to abate sector, so it's not easy to change things, but we believe it is possible to do so. And in order to do it, I now come back to the global regulation. The International Maritime Organization under the United Nations plays a very important role. They have a greenhouse gas strategy, which has a reduction of 50% by 2050. We think this is not ambitious enough. We would like to see them to go to 100% reduction. And furthermore, looking at the implementation of this strategy, we believe that market-based measures, a global carbon tax would be needed to move things in the right direction. And very important that we look at all players around, especially also less and least developed countries globally. Very happy also that Karen mentioned the Fit for 55 package in the beginning from our side. Very important proposal. We need this initiative large scale in order to be able to upscale solutions to a global level. So the European approach is very welcomed, and we see it as an important step to reach global solutions. And also here, again, we would like to see an ambitious approach also at the European level in Brussels. This was a kind of the quick talk through the decarbonization of shipping. And I know there's a number of questions out there, and I also could mention a number of other things, but I would stick to these central elements, and happy to take your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan-Christoph. That was very clear, and I also invite our audience to check out the report that is being launched right now, but it's also online, I think, already. So feel free to also post the link into the chat so that people can read some more details about decarbonizing the shipping sector. As I have announced earlier on, we will kickstart the debate now with Kieran, because he has to leave a little bit early. So Kieran, I would like to give the floor to you to, first of all, react to what you have heard, both from Harriet and from Jan-Christoph. Any thoughts how your work in the Parliament, in the committee, but also the proposals by the European Commission, Fit for 55 package, etc. Link back to what they just said, and maybe Jan-Christoph just mentioned the global aspect, if you want to say anything about the CBAM proposal by the European Commission or any other efforts to also come to some kind of international agreement and the role of the European Union there.
Well, yeah, it was really interesting to hear about the logistics work going on around the UK. Certainly previously I had talked a lot about the last mile, but I love this division into the only mile, last mile and first mile. That depth of understanding urban logistics is really refreshing, and looking at the solutions that work at different levels within dense urban centres. I think that's crucial. We have seen this explosion of deliveries with the pandemic, and maybe it was a worldwide trend anyway. I'm following this traffic jam at the Port of Los Angeles at the moment, and someone was suggesting on social media yesterday that they pretty much have to apply the same kind of approach that you are in London and other cities, of unscrambling the mess and then sorting it out, sometimes with remote locations or ports in the hinterland to stop the congestion at the port itself. And that brings me on to the presentation from Copenhagen of we tend to look at things within the European Union, but of course with sea shipping, we have to look not just at the ship, we have to look at the fuels, and we have to look at the ports where people will go to. And there's no use being ammonia ready in Europe if the United States or South America or China isn't ready as well. So it does require huge coordination at global level. And then you mentioned the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and indeed the proposal for extending or having a new emissions trading scheme that might apply to transport. The CBAM, I think, is necessary. If we bring up the price of carbon within Europe, we need to ensure that we don't have imports flooding the market from parts of the world where there isn't a carbon levy. Then the proposal to have an emissions trading scheme in the area of transport is perhaps somewhat more controversial. From an environmental perspective, we do have real concerns that this is an attempt to simply use pricing to tackle the climate crisis. And we think we need pricing within the green movement. We think, yes, we do need pricing in certain areas, but we also need regulatory change, and we need investment to get the changes that are required. And there is a tendency perhaps from some political groupings to simply see pricing as the magic wand that will solve all our carbon woes. And I don't think it is quite that easy. And we do need to ensure that particularly those on low incomes are protected. And if we just bring in carbon pricing without support systems, there is a danger that we exacerbate energy poverty, transport poverty, and indeed that we will not achieve the just transition that is required. I think all of us in political life, we remember the yellow vest, the gilets jaunes from a few years ago in France. And the lesson to me from that is we need to protect the most vulnerable in society. And simply extending the price of carbon to everyone might not do that if there aren't sufficient safeguards in place. So look, two really interesting presentations there. Really pleased to hear what's going on in the UK. And also, I'm delighted to hear, Jean-Christophe, that there is a whole team of people working with you. And I look forward to hearing in more detail about how that is progressing. Thank you.
Thank you. As we only have 10 more minutes, I'm going to ask another question. And it actually comes from the chat, and it It's basically directed mostly to both our speakers from Ireland and the UK, because it concerns Brexit, and also, well, in combination with COVID-19 and the impacts that you have experienced. Harriet, you as a company, and Kieran, you also as a policymaker, your insights into the lasting impacts of these crises. So first question would be, do you consider that there have also been some opportunities arising out of this crisis, or these crises, plural? Do you see an opportunity for any political changes? Because it has also shown to us the shortcomings of our current logistics system and how vulnerable we are, right? And then to Harriet, do you consider the fuel crisis in the UK as a consequence of Brexit, at least partly, has an impact on your company? And then there's a last question in that complex of questions around Brexit and COVID to Jan Christoph, if you can share any insights on the Suez Canal problem. So maybe we'll start with Harriet and then Kieran.
Yeah, so I guess you might think, oh, this is a great opportunity for cargo bike logistics companies to go, haha, look, we can carry on making deliveries. But I think we wanted to be quite sensitive about how we dealt with talking to people about that, and in fact did have, you know, the way that our cities are joined up, and the way that we move goods from, you know, a regional distribution hub to the edge of city hub is still using you know, diesel vans or HGVs. So there was an impact there, particularly for rolling out a big contract and kind of being able to make sure that the goods arrived. So there were still impacts in terms of linking up the logistics. Obviously, the ideal in the future is that all of that is electric, and that there's electric trunking between our depots and between our customers' regional hubs, but that doesn't exist yet. So it did have an impact on us. I think there is an opportunity to present cargo bike logistics as future-proof, to help with you know, maintaining continuity of supply within cities, but need to be careful with that, I think.
Kieran, would you like to add anything to that, also from the perspective of an Irish MEP, where you now have a border, and yeah, just your insights from a policy perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, Brexit did cause significant changes just as the pandemic kicked off, and some very simple changes. A lot of Irish trade is now going by sea directly to France and indeed Belgium, rather than using the route across the UK. So that means less trucks going down the motorways of the UK. So certainly in terms of the externalities, there have been some savings, but it takes a little bit more time. It adds maybe 5 hours to the journey, which for a lot of what we produce in Ireland in the area of pharmaceuticals, it's very time sensitive. So there are challenges that we have there. We're also seeing, with some of the tensions in Northern Ireland, a move towards reducing some of the inspections and some of the red tape with the UK, to try and make it easier for goods to flow between the UK and the EU. So hopefully we will see some progress on that over the next while. When it comes to the pandemic, you may remember early on in the pandemic, there was the move to open up green lanes to allow high priority goods to travel. And that obviously included essential foods, but then subsequently vaccines and other goods. So that was an interesting move to provide a priority to the goods that really need to get there. And I think that might feed into long-term policy changes. We also saw within urban areas an extraordinary reallocation of road space to active travel, to walking and cycling. And the hope is that some of those measures will remain after the pandemic. And that may help Harriet's enterprise in logistics of small goods travel. And hopefully we will see that happen in the time to come. And then maybe just to clarify, the extension of the emissions trading system. We would like to see it in maritime, but not to road transport because of the issues that I identified there. So look, I think the pandemic, well, not so much Brexit, but the pandemic showed the need to coordinate between countries. And I think the rollout of the vaccine program around Europe showed the virtue and the benefits of working together. And I always quote the head of the European Environment Agency, who said, look, the big challenges of our time, globalization, migration, and indeed more recently, well, climate and more recently COVID, shows that we need to work more smoothly across borders. And I think that is a crucial aspect of what we do. But I would add one last thing into the mix. An awful lot of the European project was predicated on this idea of freedom, freedom of goods, freedom of capital, freedom of services, and freedom of people to move and to travel. But actually, if we're to take the climate challenge seriously, we have to move towards using less stuff and maybe having a little bit less movement. And that kind of jars quite a bit with this all-embracing vision of a Europe where things are speeding around all the time. So the green message is maybe a little bit less stuff moving with a much smaller carbon footprint. And that's a conversation that we still have to have in more detail at a European level.
Thank you. And maybe just for our audience, because one can easily get lost in the Fit for 55 package and all the different files of legislation coming out of the European Green Deal, maybe just as some concluding remarks before you have to leave us, what files do you consider most important when it comes to the logistics sector, either within the Fit for 55 package or even the European Green Deal generally speaking? Like, where should we be most alert, and what are the key demands that really need to happen in the next year or so when legislation is decided upon?
Well, a lot of eyes will be focused on Glasgow starting from next weekend at the annual Conference of the Parties meeting. And the hope is that countries beyond the EU's borders will finalize their development, their climate contributions. But within the European Union bubble or within Brussels, I guess there's 16 Fit for 55 pieces of legislation. 13 of them have been published. 3 of them deal with specifically with transport, or will be dealt with by the Transport Committee. The Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive for road transport, the aviation, the refuel aviation, and then the fuel maritime. So these 3 will be very important, but clearly related to that will be some of those other files, and the carbon border adjustment mechanism file will be one of them. The methane strategy will come in there as well. The CO2 standards for cars and vans, and then the emissions trading scheme. Corsia comes into that as well, but that's more aviation related. And then there is an energy taxation directive. The bottom line is all of these files to some extent will impact on transport and logistics. But the 3 main ones in the Transport Committee are alternative fuels, Fuel EU, and Refuel EU aviation. But the CO standards for cars that the Environment Committee is dealing with will be, for cars and vans, will be quite important. And a lot of those other taxing and economic measures will impact on transport and logistics. The bottom line, if you're working in logistics or transport, the only way forward is to reduce your carbon footprint. And the big move from Brussels will be to help you in doing that with a combination of carrots and sticks. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Kieran, for having been with us. And obviously you can stay as long as you wish. We are happy, but you can just leave whenever you need to leave. Thank you for sharing your insights. And talking about the carrots and sticks, or no, let's do it the other way around. Let's talk about methane first and then talk about the carrots and sticks to bring Jan-Christoph back in as well. So as you can see in the chat, there was a question on e-methanol and ammonia. So I'll just read it out to those that are following in the live stream, because I don't think that they can read the chat. So the question was, ammonia has been mentioned as a low carbon fuel for shipping, but Maersk, Stena and others are moving more quickly towards e-methanol. The US has the capacity to produce more than 22 million tons of e-methanol each year, and several projects are underway in the EU. How does the Green Party view e-methanol as a solution? Well, Jan-Christoph, you're not speaking in the name of the Green Party, but maybe you can still share some insights on e-methanol and maybe also other solutions at our disposal that you deem relevant and future-proof, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you very much also for the question. And one of the first questions a lot of people ask you, what are the magic solutions to get to zero by 2050 fuel-wise? And I can tell you it's going to be a mix of different fuels, but how it's going to look like, that depends very much on a number of factors. But what is already very clear is that, for instance, methanol, but also especially ammonia, green ammonia will play a major role. And in addition to this, also to some extent biofuels, but there you would also always see a bio feedstock limitation. On the question of how much you can produce in a country, that depends very much on the energy capacity and what's behind, because it does not make sense to produce a lot of e-methanol if it's not produced in a fossil-free way. And furthermore, another question is the CO2 content of methanol. While for ammonia, it might sometimes be easier. But this said, in this first phase, the next 10, 15 years, a number of different technologies will play a role. And if you can scale up e-methanol earlier than ammonia, then why not? It's also a very good contribution to solve the overall decarbonization of shipping. Getting back to the question also from Kiaran on the regulation, as I also wrote in the chat, super important to underline that only a combination of different measures, non-financial and financial measures, will get us to zero. For instance, an emission trading scheme won't get us anywhere if the price is too low. Then people would just buy allowances and do what they did before. What is needed is also, for instance, to work with the concrete regulation on the CO2 content of fuels, and globally seen, very important, as mentioned also earlier, equitable, fair and just transition of the sector. Absolutely important to have everybody on board. On the Suez Canal question, that underlines very much the digital solutions, as well as also the congestion in front of a number of ports. If digital solutions that are actually already available and can be implemented would be used much more, then many of these questions could actually be solved, because ships could sail slower, they could know when they can get into the port, and by this save a lot of energy. Then I see one other question in or remark in the chat on biofuel. Absolutely right. Biofuel can also be manufactured from waste. Then you have the question of transportation to the areas where it's needed, and again also the question of upscaling. But clearly, biofuel, especially those from waste, are also a very good opportunity. But there are also even there feedstock limitations. I think that was it for this round. Oh, actually, I have one question. I have one question to Harriet, if I may.
Yes, please. This is an interactive panel.
Fantastic. Because as I mentioned, I'm working and living in Copenhagen, and what you described there is in many ways a reality, especially in the city center. Actually, we have a problem of congestion of bikes.
Wow.
You know, since more than half of the city is going to work or to school or university by bike every morning, every evening, I can't even pass a crossing by bike the first time it gets green because there's 200 bikes in front of me. I can't get on the bridge crossing the port because there's too many bikes now, because it's just such a big success. So therefore, my question, speaking about transport bikes, which actually fill quite in the bike lanes, they are broader than one bike, and you have a lot of bikes who would like to go a bit faster. How do you work also? How would you think about working with a regulatory framework on biking infrastructure? Because in Copenhagen, we could see as soon as you get more and more transport bikes, the big ones, you had huge problems because the people just couldn't pass by. So you needed also to approach it actually with a very ambitious approach on changing whole street systems, making bike lanes wider, closing some streets, allowing them only to go bikes through. We have some bike-only bridges now in Copenhagen, for instance. I know that's a big question that goes beyond the concrete question at hand, but I would like to hear your thoughts on it, because it has in some way also to go hand in hand to go there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's an amazing kind of scenario, I guess, from the UK perspective to hear about that. Obviously, as Kieran mentioned, active travel has increased dramatically as a result of the pandemic, and we certainly see our model as being, you know, a vital part of encouraging more of that to take place. But you're right, we need to be more asking for concrete things around the infrastructure. So you're right, wide cycle lanes are a really important thing. One of the local authorities that we work with, Waltham Forest, have a quite well-known mini Holland, as it's termed, in East London, North East London, and there are, you know, many kind of cycle-only streets which obviously prevent access for vans, and I think, you know, that's got to be part of it. And I think often we're put in as a way that businesses can feel you know, confident and comfortable that they can keep their goods moving, but definitely think that there's a strong ask around what the infrastructure needs to be like. And we'd certainly be very interested in having conversations with planners and local authorities about what's needed there.
I think that's where your work, Kieran, you're still here, is also so important, that exchange between the local, the regional, the national and the European level on all these areas, because you also mentioned the importance of spatial planning, generally speaking. And I would have a question regarding the more rural areas, because we talked a lot about the urban logistics, but how have you worked at all on rural logistics as well? And do you have any thoughts on that, Kieran, on your work in that committee, and also in the European Parliament more generally speaking, when talking about, you know, just transition and leaving no one behind?
Yeah, just to a small extent, there has been some discussions of rural mobility, and I think it's important as we move towards sustainable mobility plans for urban areas that we also have similar plans for rural areas. And there's huge potential, certainly when looking at state investment in transport in rural areas, to combine certain means of transportation. The post bus is a perfect example of that, of a means of delivering post that can also bring people. But I know within the Irish context, we put a lot of funding into bringing people to health appointments, in bringing children to school, in bringing the post to a letterbox at your door. And I think if we try and think outside the silos and think about, are there ways and are there vehicles that can think about how we bring the post, the children, the people to their medical appointments, and then the regular scheduled transport services in rural areas, and maybe mash them up a bit and produce savings that can let people and goods travel more easily from A to B and back again. And I think there's some great pilot projects around Europe that are doing that. And I think we've a lot to learn from in this area.
Yes, I'm unmuted. Thank you. As we have mentioned it several times now, but we focus on shipping and urban logistics with e-vans and cargo bikes, etc. Nevertheless, for land transport, a great way of decarbonizing logistics there and freight transport is putting more on rail. And we have an article on that topic in the European Mobility Atlas, and the author of this article is in this room and would like to say a few words on that. So I would like you to unmute yourself, Werner Balsen. And
yes, I hope you hear me.
Yes, here you are.
Okay, that's fine.
Great. Please share some insights of yours on the barriers that the freight transport on rails is still facing today in Europe.
Yes, as Kieran mentioned in his initial statement, that there is a lot of hope put in rail to solve the climate problems we are confronted with. The article I've written tries to give a perspective how realistic these hopes can be. And there you have a very technical rail system which is promoted by the EU, which has been promoted for several years now with a lot of special legislation packages, but the result is that the rail sector in Europe nearly has not been able to get a bigger market share than before all these efforts have started. And this is a rail problem, I should say. Rail was a very national transport system. That means every country did its best for its own rail system, and for nearly 100 years nobody cares how to adapt the own system to the system of the neighboring country. And so it is tough work for the European Union to make a common market for rail. And just to give you an example, rail is very complicated because there are different signal and safety technologies. There are different cars. There are different types of gauges. If you go if a truck goes from Finland to the south of Spain, it can do it easily. A train has to go through different current systems. He has to go through at least 2 gauge systems, and that makes rail transport very difficult. And on the other hand, you have some signs of hope. I would like to mention also that combined transport, that means the first mile normally done by truck, then transshipped to rail, the long part of the journey done by rail, and the last mile once again done by truck, is getting more and more share of the market. And this could be at least a sign of hope for the development of rail. I would like to leave it by that. Maybe there are special questions I would like to answer.
Thank you. Yes, and I would like to draw the attention of our audience to your article once again. It also has a nice graph showing the different challenges that rail transport still has to face today in Europe. Well, first of all, I would like to give all the speakers the possibility to react to what they heard. And then I'd also like to ask Harriet again about the sticks and carrots that we have heard about that would make it easier for companies like yours to flourish also in other cities in Europe and worldwide. The financial and non-financial tools that policymakers have at their disposal on each level of governance. Yes, so maybe you want to quickly react to that, Harriet.
Sure, about what policy change we would like to see. I think, well, I talked a little bit in the presentation just at the end there, sorry, made it a bit too long, was around what we'd like to see in terms of strategic planning. And I think, you know, one of the big challenges there is around space allocation. So we really, you know, if we're to see that, it's about a third of package deliveries that take place in the UK that could shift to cargo bikes. So that's of the 5 billion across the UK, taking into account urban, rural, etc. But in order for that to happen, you can't just keep building luxury flats. We need to have space that's set aside specifically for remoding and consolidation of freight. And I think, you know, perhaps there are things that we could look at to encourage, you know, big retailers. One of the things that we're learning about is the kind of status quo infrastructure that they have in place for working with the carrier partners that they do at the moment, and being able to kind of tap into that. And for retailers, it's quite a big, you know, it's a big thing for them to make that split for their, particularly for their urban deliveries. So if there could be some encouragement there from a political point of view, encouraging retailers to make those steps, because, you know, it's a huge, huge impact around air quality, and air quality has a big public focus across Europe and in the UK in terms of health impacts at the moment. But there's a bit of a disconnect there because retailers are making these big net zero claims, but in cities it's around air quality as well as carbon emissions. So what can be done to kind of encourage them to make that slightly, you know, I guess it's a bit of a step for them to make that transition and change. And I think, you know, there are talks around taxation of road space use in the UK. And obviously with having a lower kind of footprint on the road as a cargo bike, there's huge implications in terms of the impact on congestion and therefore the economy. So what could be done there to encourage kind of smaller profile vehicles, particularly within cities? I think that's probably mostly what we have to say on that matter. Just around the rail as well, I think there are some that we are in some cases working with doing the first and the last mile on cargo bikes in cities and then linking them up with rail. So that's happening in a couple of cities that we work in. So there's an opportunity there as well.
Great, that's exciting. Thank you. And Kieran, I see that you want to say something. So please do, and then we'll come back to you.
A last few words, if I may. Look, the rail renaissance, we really need it to happen, and not just in Western Europe, but in Central Europe as well. And a lot of the European Union funding is going into motorways. And I think we need to inform countries and work with them to try and prioritize more sustainable methods of transport. And that means boosting rail and rail freight in those countries in particular.
It is the European Year of Rail, after all, right?
Of course, and we had the Connecting Europe Express bringing trains which went around Europe communicating this message. But we need more than, you know, publicity trains going around. We need to reinvigorate rail travel through the legislative process, and revisiting that directive, I think, will really help us in the kind of movement, the combined transport directive. I was going to ask Harriet how the first day of the extended ultra low emissions zone is working out in London, but I'm certainly heartened by what's happening in London in terms of prioritizing less polluting forms of transport, like what your company offers. And I certainly think other countries could learn a lot from them. And then finally, just to say to Jean-Christophe, it really does look like interesting developments on shipping. But of course, we would certainly say that we do need to prioritize green hydrogen and green hydrogen-based ammonia from wind power, because there is a concern. I know that the organization Transport and Environment have raised some concerns about the use of methanol, about the sourcing of that methanol. So we would like to think that we have a good long-term outlook for the fuels that we use as being low carbon. And I'm sure that's very much in your thoughts as you look towards new fuels. And I hope that that work will continue.
Thank you. Yes, now, coming back to Jan Christoph, I'd also like to ask that sticks and carrot question to you, also against the background of that industry transition strategy that you're launching today, because according to that one, the path that we are right now on may actually lead to even more emissions in 2050. So what are the most important problems that you identify in that report and also in your daily work, and the most important action points? You mentioned some of them in your presentation already, but maybe you can go into a little bit more detail to like the 5 critical levers that you identified to activate to reach zero carbon shipping in 2050. And if time allows us, you can also comment on the question in the chat, again on biogas that could use the same infrastructure than LNG, liquefied natural gas.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and also thank you, Chiara. It's very much a question of upscaling existing solutions. Today, we already have a number of technological solutions, both on the sea side for the ships, but also on the land side. The big question is upscaling. How on earth can you upscale solutions to the levels that are needed? And just to give you some examples, when you look at the energy production needed to transform the sector to go zero, it's a very difficult number, but if you should come with one estimate, and that's just hypothetical, if one would like to change from 300 million tons fossil fuel to green ammonia, which won't happen because it will be a mix, but if, just for the simplicity of things, you would need at least 1,000 gigawatt capacity, most probably 1,500 or above. The new energy islands we build in Denmark and the years to come, Bornholm, the island will start with 2, and the very big energy island in the North Sea will start with 2 and then grow to 10 gigawatt capacity. And you know, first in line are households, land transportation, a number of other elements, and then comes shipping at the end. So there are some clear challenges concerning the question of energy production. We are part of Mission Innovation, which is a public-private partnership that was launched on the COP in Paris, together with the United States and Norway and Global Maritime Forum. And there we have a goal of 5% alternative fuels and 200 ships deep sea by 2030. But also here, again, the question of how can we upscale things? And a very, very key element here is create an equal level playing field between the different fuels. And this is also relevant for land transport, for bikes, cars, and the trains, which means if you, as an investor, should buy a fuel, today the fossil fuel is 2-3 times cheaper than the alternative fuel. So how can you close the fuel price gap? Therefore, financial incentives, very important, but they need to go hand in hand with non-financial incentives, like, for instance, as I mentioned before, the CO2 intensity of fuels. Biogas can play an important role here as well, but also biogas, again, due to the limited feedstock on a global level and the challenges to get it from the rural areas out to the ports, there is quite a number of questions on upscaling it, but it's an important element in the transformation phase or transition phase towards the decarbonization of shipping. Thank you.
Another question regarding that level playing field that you mentioned. I mean, it is especially relevant for the aviation and for the shipping sector, as these are by nature the most international ones. So what are your proposals and how do you engage with stakeholders on that question, on how to make sure that European companies can comply and how it is enforced internationally, and how to deal with competitors that are still acting in the same on the same market that don't have to comply with the same environmental rules? Like, what are your solutions to that problem?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. But first and foremost, you need to have the same rules in one market area. Therefore, in the EU proposal, very important that you apply the same rules also to ships coming from outside the Union. to EU ports. If you won't do it, then you would have a big problem. And some may claim that you have the problem anyway, because only a global solution can solve things around the globe, naturally speaking. But I think the EU proposal is very good, as long as it can be applied to all ships that reach a port, no matter whether it's a EU state flag or whether it's a flag from Singapore or Panama that reaches an EU port. That's very important. Furthermore, what is a very big question is, how on earth can you certify fuels not produced within the EU? If somebody comes with a, let's say, a biogas and reaches the port of Rotterdam, you want to have a good certificate that shows you this biogas is actually produced in a sustainable way. That's a big question, but a number of people working on it, and I have no answer to it now. We would need some classification society cooperation that you already have today globally on a number of other questions, for instance, safety on board on the ships. But that's things that one can deal with. Allow me also just finally to answer your question on the critical levers. Well, to us, the shipping sector can't do things alone, and it would not ever do things alone. So what also plays very much into this is, how can customers, for instance, play a role? Customers who would like to pay 0.5% more to make sure that their equipment they buy from China, for instance, is shipped in a sustainable way. Then you also have a role of the finance sector. Very important to look at banks, others who would like to lend money to support sustainable projects. Could this be done at a cheaper price than for instance, money and loans that would go to fossil stakeholders all around? And then, not at least, you also have the technological development. We hope to see more solutions to make, for instance, electrolyzers much more efficient than they are today, to make fuel cells much more efficient than today. If you use these elements, then you can use a lot of energy, and this can bring us much earlier in the direction of our target zero carbon shipping by 2050. But again, it's really, really not easy, and we depend not at least on political will on the highest level. So we also hope that the COP in Glasgow will send a clear signal also to the aviation and shipping sector. Please move in this direction, not at least for the shipping sector, 100% reduction by 2050 to substitute the current goal of IMO from 50% to go to 100%. That would be very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan-Christoph. Looking at the time, it is almost time to wrap up the discussion. Maybe as a last question, also to you, Harriet, but I would also like to give you the freedom to touch upon any other things that you think were not mentioned enough or elaborated on enough. We talked a lot about the supply side, but what about the demand side? What has to change when it comes to like consumer behavior or other policies outside the transport sphere? This is a very big question, but maybe you just have a few thoughts to share with us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of mixed messaging out there for consumers at the moment about what constitutes, a sustainable anything that they buy. And I think when it comes to, choices that they make from who they're going to purchase from and the information that they get around deliveries, there's a vast range, and there's no standardization there. So people know about these big level problems. They maybe have a, desire to do something better. But when it goes to even people that are very motivated to find out, levels of detail, they might find one option is offering carbon offsetting, another is offering deliveries that are consolidated, and another is offering perhaps a green mode of transport, an EV or a cargo bike. And so I think that there needs to be a bit more of honest discussions, I think, with the way that we're presenting that information to consumers. But there is an increase. I think it's 72% of people in the UK that would pay more for a sustainable delivery. So there's the intent, but it's closing that gap, as always.
Thank you. And Jan-Christoph, maybe closing remarks from your side with regards to your expectations on COP, as it is a timely topic starting in a few days from now?
Well, I'm very happy that the UN Secretary General also pointed out that although the COP doesn't regulate shipping and aviation, we need clear signals that point in the direction of the decarbonization. So that's very good. And I hope that there will also be more commitment from the business side. But at the end of the day, the year of truth for everybody is 2030, not 2050. And I hope that more people will realize that we only actually have 8 years to go to create the whole regulatory framework, the technological solutions, in order to have pilot projects in the water that everybody knows we can do it. So I hope that the urgency will really dominate the agenda and send us some clear signals to the politicians and other decision makers.
Thank you. Those were great final words. I hope that our audience came to understand a little bit better what the major barriers are still today in making the freight transport sector more sustainable. I hope that you got a better understanding on why it is so difficult to get more on rail or on cargo bikes, etc., but also what we can do about it and what potential solutions could look like, and that technological solutions are definitely needed, but that they cannot be the only answer, and that the systems approach is definitely needed to really change things up here. And at the end, I would like to recall why a transformation of the freight transport sector is so important, and Harriet has also done a great job in that, because of course it comes down to combating climate change ahead of COP26 now starting in a few days, but it is about more than only reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It is also about internalizing other external costs that are so far neglected, such as noise pollution, congestion, accidents, local pollution, air pollution, etc. So I think it's always important to recall why we are doing this, and these are very important areas to act on. And if we finally decided to start internalizing these external costs with the right policy measures, financial and non-financial, I think a bright future is ahead of us. So thank you so much to our speakers for having taken the time. Thank you to all of you who joined in this afternoon. And please feel free to check out the European Mobility Atlas with all the chapters. We keep adding onto the online dossier, so it won't get boring. Thank you again for participating, and let's stay in touch.